Today I'll be analyzing the beam skills and routine of Nastia Liukin from China. Let's get started with the analysis. Liukin starts with a simple jump onto the beam. In the past, she's also done the cool looking jump back to shoulder stand or arm stand, but as of late, it's the more simple jump onto the beam. Here, she moves on to her very fast front walkover into a very solid and comfortable tucked front flip, and she keeps the series moving together smoothly, which is very important to get the complete value of the series. Nice flexibility, and she's very precise in her approach to her skills. Here's a side-by-side with Sky Blakely. They both land very high. Sky puts her arms to the side, and this acts like a stabilizer, where Liukin keeps her arms down to keep her center of gravity lower to the beam. I believe this is a personal preference of comfort. Now into her full turn, she actually spins faster than most other gymnasts, as we can see here on her spins on floor. She shows really precise position on this leap and how she lands in this leap. Here's a side-by-side with Suni Lee. You can see for yourself they both have very nice flexibility. Head thrown back and arms to the side. Liukin's leg is bent more than Suni, but Suni has a slightly wider split. Both very nice. Now into an aerial side flip, quickly moving into two jump full turns, twisting opposite directions. Very solid. Again, very precise with her specific arm movements in shapes that help her maintain great control. Here's a side-by-side with Jordan Childs. Very similar position in mid-air, both eyeing the beam. Liukin stands up a bit faster and higher than Jordan, and they both hold one arm out in front to stabilize their balance. Well done. This is very nice, slightly oversplit in the split leap. Watch the fast and forward motion in her lunge to create power. Again, nice split in the switch leg split leap with a half turn. She keeps the sequence moving smoothly and precise, very nice. Now into a very clean and flexible aerial walkover, quickly moving into one of the same leaps she did earlier in her routine. The leap is similar, but the angle is very different. She shows nice flexibility in both, moving smoothly in rhythm into a back handspring step out. Even in this more basic back handspring, we can see her virtuosity in her flexibility. Very nice. Here's a side-by-side with Nastia Liukin doing an aerial walkover. Liukin has cleaner execution and split here, even more than the very elegant Nastia Liukin. Both land very solid. Liukin dismounts with a round-off triple full or a back layout with 3 twists. Here's another side-by-side with Nastia Liukin. Liukin leans back and twists noticeably earlier than Nastia, and this may contribute to her over-rotating the skill a bit. They both have their legs together, but also their feet are crossed slightly. Nastia is just short of her complete triple twist, where Liukin fully completes her triple twist, but because Nastia lands more upright, she squares up her twist on the hop, and this kind of covers up the incomplete twisting. Here's a much cleaner and more solid landing from Liukin on her dismount. Very nice. Both starts with a straddle press to a handstand, the same mount Olympic gold medalist Shannon Miller mounted with. She would make slight changes to this mount, but the structure of her routine stayed pretty consistent. Yangbo had a very elegant flow and patience to the rhythm of her movements in her beam routine. Wow, look at that handstand. That's a straight handstand. Beautiful. Here's a back handspring, back layout step out, right into a full twisting back 3/4 flip to a chest roll or a raffolva. She's really aggressive and consistent with this pass, and with really clean and tight form, she controls the chest roll down very well. She used to do this skill solo until she eventually incorporated it into her tumbling series. Here's her back handspring into 2 layout step outs. Really solid and clean. I've seen her do this many times, and it's very rare that she has any bobbles on this pass. Look closely at her great execution throughout her back layout step outs. She keeps her arms to the side to help stabilize her balance as she's flipping. Great work. This eventually evolved into a 1-arm back handspring into 2 layout step outs. That seemed just as consistent as her 2-hand back handspring version. At the 1990 World Cup, she completed her routine with no noticeable bobbles or adjustments and stuck her landing. This led her to a gold medal at the World Cup. Here's her aerial walkover straight into a front scale with smooth rhythm and great flexibility. I like the fact that her leg never drops down as she goes into a cartwheel into her split handstand. I think eventually I'll do a video on gymnasts that were regarded as the best in the world and heavily favored to win, but due to some error or other circumstance they never won. There are quite a few gymnasts that have experienced that. She was a top-ranked gymnast and favored to win in the 1989 World Championships in Stuttgart, Germany. She did an incredible routine with no bobbles, but she stumbled on her dismount, taking several steps forward. It's amazing she didn't put her hands down. If you watch closely, it looks like her foot slightly missed the beam and she didn't get the proper punch into her dismount. It's really difficult to watch a great routine just to see an error on the last skill. Let's get started with the analysis. I've seen Shannon make small changes to her routine over the years as she increased her difficulty. She would most often mount with a straddle L pressed to handstand facing one direction or the other, and then showing a form of flexibility in her handstand. I think this was a comfortable start for her. I've also seen her mount with a front tuck, and she also used a front tuck within her routine for a while, which she did very well. Here's a side-by-side of Svetlana Boganskaya and Shannon doing a running front flip on the beam. Svetlana always landed lower like this, as it lowered her center of gravity to be more stable, where Shannon lands much higher and with more virtuosity. Now this is cool and done so well. A gainer layout to a one-leg scale. Very controlled and impressive. This was not a one-time thing, as I saw Shannon do this on many occasions. She has to spot the beam and control that momentum to stop in this one-leg scale position. Here's her full turn. I've never seen her bobble on this skill. Her back extension to handstand here looks comfortable, like she's doing it on the floor, and it's right into a back handspring step out to a layout 2 feet landing. She just so often lands so solid and comfortable, never really seemingly being nervous or tight. Her slender body type contributed to her elegance, as we see in these complete split leaps. This is a back handspring with a quarter turn to a handstand. She keeps it small, like a dive back walkover to a quarter twist, and she was very consistent. She actually created her own skill based on this skill called the Miller. It's a back handspring with a quarter twist to an immediate half pirouette. Again, she keeps the back handspring very low, like a jumping back walkover, to help her control and quickly pirouette into her split handstand. The split helps her greatly to balance at the end of the skill, and you can see how quickly she gets into the split handstand. Very innovative and very consistent. This is 3 consecutive layout step-outs done incredibly solid. She never loses momentum or rhythm and stays constant throughout this series. It seems if the beam were longer, she could just keep going. Here's a side-by-side of Tatiana Gutsu and Shannon. They have similar types of body styles, not just in their beam series, but in their overall gymnastics as well. I put in this Valdez because I once heard that Shannon really enjoyed doing Valdezes. I'm not sure if she was joking or not though. Her dismount was a round-off full-in back out, or a double back with a full twist. She stood up very fast and was consistently patient and squared off for her takeoff. Right here, with her head even to the beam, she makes this full in very easily. She starts her twist a bit earlier on the floor, but she doesn't need to square off like she does on the beam. However, once she leaves the ground, her technique is the same on the beam and the floor, and they look very similar. Let's get started with the analysis. She starts off with a press to a handstand. Even here we see excellent technique on this relatively easy skill. Her hips and shoulders stay in a straight line, while she uses her flexibility to compress as if she's staying between 2 narrow imaginary walls. Very efficient technique here. Nastia seems to use even the small transitional skills as opportunities to show her elegance and her flexibility. She shows great symmetry and shoulder flexibility in just this passive pose. This is much more demanding than many realize. I use this side by side to show how consistent she was in her beam acro skills. These aerial walkovers are done in real time and look almost like a mirror. Such nice extension and rhythm in this aerial walkover into a back handspring step out to a back layout step out. Very solid. Here's a consistent full turn with her leg held horizontally. I noticed a nice toe point throughout. Here's a switch leg split with a half turn, done with very nice flexibility, hitting a 180-degree split with great execution. Even her arms show a nice symmetry in her personal style throughout this leap. Again, very solid. Here she does an anoti, or a jump back handspring with a half turn into a front walkover. Very clean. She does this sequence casually with very little effort. Looking again, Nastia finishes the half turn very early, and watch as she keeps her foot almost stationary as a stabilizer to square off her front walkover. Again, nice flexibility throughout the skill and really nice technique. Here she throws her arms opposite directions to create momentum in her twist and shows great compression spotting the beam at each half turn. Very nice full twisting leap. Nastia shows very good flexibility and elegance, but also she uses this to help maintain and adjust her balance. Really doing beautiful gymnastics. She has a longer ponytail than most, and her feet touch it pretty easily here. To get full value in this leap, she throws her head back, losing sight of the beam. Her arms are thrown back so far they're almost parallel to the floor, and this helps her demonstrate more arch in her leap. A very comfortable landing. Here's her aerial side flip. She lands this side flip very high with good rotation, and this gives her a bit more time to micro adjust on her landing. Very solid. This is kind of a cool skill. It's an aerial walkover into a tuck front landing on one leg with great control. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was part of her choreography, and she was very consistent with this one-leg landing. Again, in the switch leg split, she strongly throws her head back and shows an oversplit in this very iconic position. This position would make a nice poster. Great form and execution. Her most common dismount was a round-off 2.5 twisting back layout, and I would say she stuck this more than half the time. Here's a side-by-side with Olympic beam champion Alici D'Amato. They both get their feet crossed a little bit in their twist, but they square up very nicely and finish with very controlled landings. Here's a side-by-side with Olympic silver medalist on the beam, Zhao Yakin from China. Nastia did often struggle to keep her feet together in her twisting skills. Yakin has better form with her feet and legs, but she over-rotates a little bit where Nastia lands much more upright. Everybody has their gymnastic style preferences. Nastia is one of my favorite gymnasts to watch due to her great flexibility, excellent execution and technique, and the attention she pays to small details. Her personal characteristics of her gymnastics seem to stand the test of time, and even now, many current athletes reflect on Nastia's style and execution. We'll start the analysis on the event she won at the 2008 Olympics, beam. Shawn has a very aggressive style. The pace of her routine was very fast, and even with many difficult skills, she was pretty consistent on beam. Here is her standing 2 back handsprings to a very high layout backflip. Just so solid. These are 2-foot takeoff back handsprings, not step out, so it's much more difficult. However, it does generate a lot more power. Her legs are slightly apart on her 2 back handsprings, the second one less, but she has great body position in her back layout. It'd be a challenge to do it this solid on the regular ground. She does a 1-step front pike or a front flip with her legs straight. She bends them slightly in preparation for her landing, but very solid. Here's a side-by-side with the only other American to win a gold medal on the beam in the Olympics, Shannon Miller. Shannon does her front tucked, but they both land equally high and solid. Now she does a standing full, or a backflip with a full twist in the tuck position. A very difficult skill, and she does it with no adjustment at all. Very solid. She spots the beam on her standing full and sees the beam almost through the entire skill. She was very consistent with the skill as well. Shawn was not known for her flexibility, and it may be considered the one characteristic of her gymnastics that was not exceptional. We can see this in her leaps. Her standing back looks casual for her. She was just so solid on beam. She does flow smoothly from her leap series into nice acro skills and acro series. Here's a standing layout step out into a 2-foot landing layout back, done with no adjustment at all. This dynamic is what she was known for. Really nice. She was also very good at hiding her micro adjustments in balance with arm movements and choreography. Here's a quick change of arm movement to cover up a small imbalance. She had nice toe point throughout her beam routine in the small skills and the big skills as well. She dismounts with a round off full in back out or a double back flip with a full twist very comfortably. Here's a side by side with Shannon Miller. Shawn leans back in her set for her full in a little more than Shannon. This accelerates her flip rotation but loses a bit of height. She's also more open in her tuck position and finishes her full twist slightly later than Shannon. Twisting late helps the speed of the flip rotation but makes it harder to stay in a tight tuck. Just a really exciting and nice rhythm to her beam work, and it's just fun to watch. Her energy and aggressiveness really pull you in. If she was ever nervous, you'd never know it. Really great beam work. Let's get started with her analysis. Dudnik does a round-off back layout step-out onto the beam. The more symmetrical her arms are, the more she's on balance as gymnasts use their arms for micro-adjustments during their skills. She spots the beam with very even arm position. She was really consistent on this mount. They both mount out of a round-off, but Ekaterina does a very long, difficult series right off the start. Round-off back handspring onto the beam, back handspring to 2 step-out layouts. That's great work. Getting her hands on the beam quickly allows her a small amount of time to adjust before her series. Dudnik simply spots the beam and prepares for a comfortable landing. We can see Ekaterina adjust her arms in the air to keep her centered over the beam. This happens incredibly fast, very nicely done. This is Dudnik's very rare and nicely done round-off layout full, or back layout with a full twist. She was so consistent with this and made it look so easy. This skill alone set her apart from many of the other competitors. When we look from the top, we can see she initiates the twist and her body is slightly turned, but she keeps her center of gravity directly over the beam. She also spots the floor very clearly here. The nice thing about a full is you can see the ground, or in this case the beam, below you almost the entire time during the skill. She controls the landing very well. Another series is her side aerial into 2 layout back step outs. Doing the side aerial before the 2 layouts makes the layouts much more difficult to square up, so it's a very difficult combination. Nice flexibility as she sets up. She sees the beam the whole time during the skill and gets her foot down very quickly to help set up and square off for her next 2 back layout step outs. As we can see, her legs are a bit loose and slightly bent here, but later that same year at the '89 World Championships, she cleaned up her form and did the series much better. You can also see she's not as straddled in her flips, and this tells me she's a bit stronger and higher as she jumps back into her layout step outs, which gives her more time in the air. In both competitions, she manages her balance very consistently. Well done. Let's take a look at her split leaps and flexibility. If she had any category that was not ideal on beam, I would say it was her leap series. When we compare Dudnik and Yang Bo, who's extremely flexible in her split and split leaps, as we can see here, or when we compare to Ekaterina, who is also very flexible in her leaps and split skills, we can see a noticeable difference. These are extreme comparisons, and side by side, I notice them very much. Watching Dudnik solo, her splits seem to be adequate. Any lack of virtuous execution of her split leaps seems to be overwritten by her extreme level of difficulty and her great execution of some of the most difficult skills in the world. Alicia executed a dismount you don't see that much even these days. It's a triple full, or a back layout with 3 twists. Dudnik did her triple full out of a round-off back handspring, and she did it very well. The beam is a small area to twist off of, and it takes a lot to fit 3 twists into a single flip. but she had to be patient and connect with the beam first, or she could miss the beam or miss her punch. She has slightly crossed legs, but she gets to twist around very well and usually sticks this landing or comes very close to sticking her landing. Her rare stumble on her dismount at the 1989 World Championships on her beam dismount was very unfortunate, but definitely not characteristic of her consistency. Also, when we look closer, her feet are very close to the end of the beam. Psychologically, I wonder if she may have been aware of this, and out of a microsecond of concern backed off her punch ever so slightly, which may contribute to her lower landing. There's been others to do this dismount as well, like Olympic champion Nastia Liukin, who did it very well. There's also been others to do a layout backflip with a full twist on the beam, like Den Lingling, and she did hers extremely well within a series. Really great work. Dudnik seemed to try to put these unique difficult skills all into one routine. If she hit her beam, she was going to medal, and most likely it would be gold. I believe the beam work of Nastia Dudnik inspired many athletes and helped pave the way for the trends of future generations. Let's get started. She mounts slowly and comfortably with a straddle split on the beam. Carly had nice flexibility, and she showed it in even the passive skills, and we'll see more in her split leap series. Her first acro skill is a standing Arabian front. That's a jump backwards with a half turn to a front flip. This is hard to do on a regular floor and much more difficult to square up on a balance beam. She does it comfortably. Technically, you have to imagine jumping up and over a pole that is behind you. This helps you gain enough height and rotation without flipping crooked and potentially falling. We can see she spots the beam very early after her half turn. This gives her a visual and a feeling where the beam is to micro adjust in the air as much as she can to prepare for landing. She lands a bit squatted, as this keeps her center of gravity low and helps with balance. In her generation, this was not a deduction, but in the current generation, they can deduct for landings that are too low or squatted. Still, very stable and balanced on this very difficult skill. Now watch for this throughout this video, as this ending position she strikes after each skill greatly contributes to her softness in her landings. More on that later. In this side by side with Shalise Jones and Carly, we can see they both set up as if they're jumping over a pole behind them. This sets their height and flip rotation. Then they both square off the front flip in the air and focus on controlling the landing. They stand up very quickly and are solid. Here's another passive skill that Carly shows very nice flexibility. Here's her smooth aerial walkover to a standing back handspring step out, done very softly. When we look at Olympic champion Shannon Miller, her series is very solid, but she's slightly rigid on her landing. Jordan Childs is also solid, but even more rigid as each foot hits the beam. Carly has a very smooth and light feeling with the beam and lands so soft and elegant. Contributing factors to her smoothness is that she keeps her momentum moving across the beam and not down into the beam. She keeps her head down slightly longer and lower than most gymnasts in her landing. This helps her focus on the beam, but it also absorbs some of the momentum from her landing. Right here, she's already on balance, so her standing up with a wide range of motion and a slow, constant speed greatly adds to the softness and elegance of her landings. Really great timing. Even when she did a layout full on the beam, she landed smooth and elegant with the same technique. This smooth, slow, standing up range of motion. On her aerial walkover, she watches the beam all the way until her foot lands on the beam. Great position here. Again, her momentum moves across the beam and not down into the beam. Once her legs are on the beam, they freeze and her torso is all that slowly moves to vertical. This is her run tucked front flip on the beam. Now the one on the left is slightly off balance, but the one on the right is perfectly balanced. Watch the effect this small little difference makes on the next jump skill. The balanced front flip leads to her leap with her head fully looking back, her arms fully open and down, and her feet lifted up high in a much bigger arch, then returning to the beam for a soft landing. Here's a side by side with Shannon Miller. Shannon throws her arms harder, but they both land in similar squats and find their center of balance very quickly. Carly was very consistent on her full turns. Now look at this hurdle into her split leap. Look how long she hurdles. This helps her gain power and height in a very nice switch leg split leap. She has a slight oversplit, and this is beautifully done. Smoothly going into a standing back tuck with her trademark soft landing. It's just like she was doing this on the floor. Now into her dismount, which is named after her, called the Patterson. It's a round off back handspring Arabian double front, and she fights for the landing. Here's a side by side with herself doing this dismount. On the right, she's a bit close to the edge, but punches more solidly into her Arabian double front. She has a slight cowboy position here, or her knees are slightly apart in her front, but she has a very tight tuck, and this helps her spin quickly. It's a blind landing, so it's more difficult to stick, but she's pretty consistent with standing up comfortably on this dismount. This was one of the best ones I saw her do. Very nicely done. As always, thanks again for checking out my analysis, and I always hope you get some value out of it. If you'd like to get notifications when I post videos like this in the future, please subscribe and like my channel, and feel free to leave any thoughts you might have in the comments. Until next time, rock on and all my best.